Thank you very much, Janice. Well, welcome everybody. I hope you don't mind, but we're going to do our annual general meeting first. It will be quick, I promise you. Then we will have our key speaker. Afterwards, I will do the announcements, news, and branch meetings. So that's our agenda for tonight. The Durham Region Branch of Ontario Ancestors acknowledges that the lands on which we gather and where we work to preserve the records and family history of those who came before us are the traditional territories of the Mississauga of Scugog Island First Nation, the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation, and a large Métis community. We recognize the lands on which we gather are covered under the Williams Treaties and rest within the traditional territory of the Mississaugas, a branch of the Anishinaabe Nation, which also includes Algonquin, Chippewa, Ottawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi. We honor, recognize, and respect these nations and Indigenous peoples as the traditional stewards of the lands and waters on which we meet. So, this portion of the general meeting will be our annual meeting. I will present the chair's report, ask for call for volunteers, and then I can congratulate our Volunteer Service Awards winners. So Durham Region Branch was formed in 1982, and we still have some of our founding members working as volunteers, which I think is absolutely wonderful. For our library, we purchased Really and Truly the Father, the Bastardy Affidavits from Newcastle District and the United Counties of Northumberland and Durham from 1837 to 1961. This was produced by Linda Korup who was our speaker in January this year. So many more school yearbooks have also been donated to our Ryan Taylor yearbook collection. And under the guidance and indefatigable work of Laurie Wood, the Fitzgerald collection, which I think we had 20 odd boxes of their collection, it's still undergoing some organizational fine-tuning, but it is basically cataloged at this point, which is an incredible project. And we'd like to thank Laurie for that work. And her husband, Steve, who has definitely been there helping her all along. Our branch meetings this year, our DNA Special Interest Group and the social virtual drop-ins have done well. Our branches held general meetings on the following very eclectic topics: bastardy bonds, cousins across the border, Camp 30, World War II German POWs here in Bowmanville, ancestors moving around, the Trail of the Betts Bibles, township papers, loyalists, New Netherlands, and we look forward to today's talk on the United Church of Canada archives. The ongoing project to update some larger cemeteries in Durham Region has seen several sections added to our marketplace on the Ontario Ancestors website, with further sections of the Hampton Union and Lakeview cemeteries due to be added shortly. These two cemetery picnics that we held were very enjoyable, and we had some new transcribers out to help. Some of our older, smaller cemeteries have also been retyped and added as well to our marketplace. Our Kindred Spirits newsletter is continuing, and we really don't have a content editor. Sometimes our team does struggle to keep it filled with relevant news. Submitted articles are always needed and very welcome. And I would encourage anybody, if you've got, a family here in Durham Region or a topic of general interest, please send us a submission. The new digital delivery model has been working well to keep our costs down and keep our membership fee at the same great rate. The website refresh is close to being finished, and we'll be hopefully able to get it published in the new year. In the meantime, the temporary website, timetraces.com/Durham branch is still the best place to get our news, which I also do post our upcoming meetings on the events calendar, which is on the homepage of the Ontario Ancestors website. Respectfully submitted by me, Nancy Trimble, Chair. Now, what is your strength? I'm sure that we have a project that could use it. We have indexing, typing, editing, cemetery updating, newsletter articles, publicity, Tony indexing, transcribing, social media person. I'm not the greatest on Facebook, I'll tell you, and we could really use someone to monitor that space. So please help us keep our branch vibrant and moving forward. If you can help in any way, you don't have to be on the team. You can just be an assistant to one of the members on our team. Contact me at durhamchair@ogs.on.ca. And I would really like to congratulate these following people for their years of service with our branch. Stacy Goddard has been put in 10 years. Sheila Iacono is also a 10-year award winner, and Paul Smith was a 5-year award member. And here is our current team, our current crew on the ship as it was. Please come and join us. They're some of the nicest people you'd ever want to meet. So at this point, I declare our annual general meeting closed, and I would like to introduce our speaker. Kyle Pugh is the Ontario Regional Council's archivist at the United Church of Canada's Archives. In this capacity, he leads the team responsible for the acquisition and preservation of records from Ontario's regional councils and communities of faith. Prior to this role, he has also been an archivist at McMaster University Library in Hamilton, the County of Wellington Archives in Fergus, and he interned at the Thomas Fisher Rare Book Library in Toronto. Kyle is currently in his second term on the board for the Association of Canadian Archives, where he serves as the treasurer. So I will stop my share and let Kyle bring up his PowerPoint.
And let's see if I can do that again. Aha, okay, are people seeing the PowerPoint?
It is starting to come.
All right, and you can still see the PowerPoint?
Not yet. It just, for me, it says Kyle Pugh has started screen sharing, but it hasn't. Now it's up. There it is.
Perfect.
You're set to go.
Delight. And if anything comes up with audio, please let me know. The Rogers service has returned, and I'm cautiously optimistic that it'll stay. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me this evening to chat about the United Church of Canada Archives and how it can help you with your genealogical research. I've been taking a look at the current participants, and I'm actually seeing some names that I recognize, both from people that I've interacted with at the United Church Archives and other fellow archivists. Shout out to Bruce County Archives. My name's Kyle Pugh. I'm the Ontario Regional Council's archivist at the United Church, and over the course of the next 45 minutes or so, I'm going to discuss a bit about the United Church itself, particularly its brief history and structure. I'm then going to give you an overview of the archives and its structure before diving into the records that we have. I'll go in depth on the records I think are most pertinent for genealogists, as well as some others that may be of interest. I'll discuss how to actually find the records we have, including a demonstration of our website, before shifting to the future of the archives and providing an opportunity for questions and answers. I also want to thank you for spending some time with me today. If you're like me and the US election is all that's on your mind, I hope that this is as welcome of a break for you as it is for me. So this has actually largely been covered already. I kind of forgot that I had submitted a brief bio before I got into it. Yeah, so you already know my qualifications and why I'm somebody that you could theoretically actually listen to and pay attention. And as noted, all around good guy. Oh, sorry. Power. There we go. All right. So, oh, sorry. There we are. So with that all being said, of course, I'm not the feature of the presentation. So in archives, we often base how we arrange and describe records on how and by whom the records are made. And so it's important to have at least a cursory understanding of the church's history and structure to make sure that you can most easily find the records that you're looking for. The United Church of Canada was formed in 1925. We're turning 100 in 2025, and we're very much looking forward to it. And the church was formed in a merger of three of the largest Protestant denominations in the country at the time. This featured the Methodist Church, which had united about 40 years earlier and brought together the Primitive, the Wesleyans, and the Episcopal branches into the Methodist Church of Canada, the Congregational Union, and the Presbyterian Church in Canada. It was more or less the entirety of the Methodist Church of Canada that joined Union. Some smaller Methodist churches may still can be found in Canada from time to time, but these are often from American Methodists who have moved to Canada and formed one-offs rather than a concentrated Methodist movement. With much respect to the Congregational Union, most people haven't really heard of them, but we still love them. They were probably the smallest to join the United Church. And if you are wondering about the Presbyterian Church, since it is very much still around. While a majority of the Presbyterian Church did join Union in 1925, around 30% actually decided to remain Presbyterians, and so they still exist. At last count, I do believe that there are actually more United churches in Ontario than there are Presbyterian churches in Canada, but they are vibrant and they are, not that I'm going to pick favorite archives because obviously mine would win, but the Presbyterian Church Archives is actually very robust. So the major push for a church union was really financial. It's hard, particularly, but just generally, to accommodate a Methodist, an Anglican, a Presbyterian, a Congregational, a Roman Catholic, so many other churches in a little town. And it's hard for those split resources to do things like fund the church, fund missionary work, and expand across what was then a growing country. Geographically growing. However, with the combined resources of the Methodist, Presbyterians, and the Congregationalists, the United Church was able to become the largest mainline Protestant denomination in the country, and did fund a great deal of missionary work, both at home and abroad, which is of course problematic, but that was the goal of the church. Now, I mentioned that in archives we often structure how we.
Kyle, we are having some bits of audio breaking up a little bit, so just have to do the best you can. I know Rogers had an outage for you there up until 5 minutes before presentations, so we'll just have to bear with it. So just
all right. I mentioned that in archives we often structure how we arrange, describe, and make available records based on the record's creator. And so I think I'll take a brief minute just to talk about the structure of the United Church. That way you can pinpoint where records would be that you'd be interested in looking at. The United Church actually underwent a major restructuring in 2019. I'll go over the older as well as the current governance structure. But I'll preface it by saying that historically, the United Church has been a very grassroots organization. So much of the power resided in the lower levels of the church. So in the image on the left, you can see that at the center of the church structure, and this image is taken out of a church publication on congregational organization. You can see that the pastoral charge is at the center. Now, when we talk about pastoral charges, what we're talking about, it may be, and it often is, a single congregation. We see those single congregation pastoral charges we'll see in urban centers. Or it may be made up of several congregations who have decided to pool their resources. And we often see this in rural settings where small town church can't afford to pay for a minister on their own, as well as the manse and the fees associated with the church. And so they join forces with several other churches to help spread the costs around. So share the minister with another congregation. They'll share the expenses of housing minister. And their contributions to the broader church. Historically, each pastoral charge would then report to a presbytery, and a presbytery may have somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 20 pastoral charges. And the presbyteries would be responsible for overseeing largely property matters, but they would also make sure that ministers were doing their jobs, that congregations were happy. They would be the folks or the organization that congregations would turn to if they needed a hand, growing their pool of congregants or members. And the presbytery would go around and conduct reviews of these congregations, and they would do so much more. Presbyteries are actually where a lot of the power truly resided in the United Church. In the old church structure. Presbyteries would in turn report up to a conference, and each conference may be made up of 4 to 7 presbyteries, depending on the population. So in Durham, you might see something like the Bay of Quinte Conference, which stretches from Whitby to Coburg up to Peterborough. But then it would have several presbyteries like Belleville, which is focused primarily around, organizing churches in Belleville, with the individual pastoral charges and reporting up to the presbytery. The number of conferences vary across time and space. Many of them would be in existence from Union in 1925 onward to the reorganization in 2019. But there were some new ones that developed, including up in Northern Ontario with the formation of Manitou Conference in the 70s. Despite the advantages of having a larger system like this, and from an archives perspective, it was extremely advantageous because the presbyteries would go around and make sure that the individual congregations were taking good records. So they had a very soft spot they have a soft spot in my heart. It's an extremely bureaucratic and expensive system to maintain. In 2019, the church restructured, as you can see on the right, and eliminated some of the middlemen. So the pastoral charges and the general council still exist, the general council being the national body. But the role of presbytery and conference were rolled into what are now called regional councils. And so you now have pastoral charges reporting up to regional council, and regional council reports up to the general council. Now we'll actually talk about what you're here to hear about, and that would be archives. I want to stress a few things up front to avoid any confusion. And it's something that was actually being talked about just before this presentation began before everyone was admitted. And that was the term the United Church of Canada Archives. And I want to clarify that this is actually somewhat misleading. There are many archives for the United Church in Canada, but the largest one is centered in Toronto. And in Toronto, we have two separate archival programs running together to form the United Church of Canada Archives, which I know is clear as mud. So in the United Church, each regional council has its own archives, as does the General Council. In Ontario, there are 6.5 regional councils. There's one that's split between Ontario and Quebec, and they all share one archive. The one that I am responsible for running is the one that's responsible for these 6.5 regional councils. And we work alongside the staff of the General Council archives. But there are archives across the country. There are, BC has its own, and they exist in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ottawa, and Montreal, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland. And because we have two different programs, it means we have two different areas of focus when it comes to our collections. The Ontario Regional Council Archives, which again is the one that I lead, is focused on collecting the records of the regional councils, as the name would lead you to believe, as well as its predecessors, the conferences and the presbyteries. We're also responsible for collecting the records of the individual pastoral charges, or just individual congregations. These records, the congregational records, are really likely going to be the greatest interest to genealogical researchers, because this is the level that most people interact with the church. These are where the vital statistics registers are, the membership records, some of the cemetery records. And I want to just take a quick moment to note that at the congregational level, records from pre-union are still gathered together. So if a congregation was a Methodist church in 1924, when they joined the United Church in 1925, their records are going to be organized together because it was still the same church, it was still the same folks in attendance. In many cases, their records would carry over. A baptismal register from 1924 is still going to be used in 1925. And so trying to separate that out not only is confusing for us, but is far more confusing for our researchers. In the other program, the General Council Archives, these are the folks that are responsible for the national body. These are the church finance records, human resources, pensions, Ministry of Home Missions. Interestingly, one of the largest collections that they have is actually from what was called Berkeley Studios, which was the communications arm of the United Church. And so we have tons of videos that were put together by Berkeley Studios and to be shipped out to congregations across the country. We also have wonderful clip art from the early mid to late 90s that they would send out on floppy disks, and then congregations could insert United Church made clip art into their record or into their newsletters. They're responsible for the personal papers of clergy. Usually it's limited to clergymen of some esteem. Often it would be at the moderator level. The moderator is the spiritual guide for the United Church. It's kind of like, I'm sure this is going to be a contentious metaphor or a simile, but they're the equivalent of the Pope for the United Church, but with much less power. Because as I said, we're a grassroots organization. The General Council Archives also holds the papers for missionaries and for the broader missionary office. The name changes over time, but typically it's something along the lines of the Department of Home Missions. And this is, or the Department of Foreign Missions. And this is missionary work that was happening both abroad, so China, Japan, Korea, in various areas of Africa, but also work that was being done at home here in Canada. So you will often see what are called ethnic ministries in the United Church. This could be a Hungarian, a Chinese congregation, a Korean ministry. These often started out as missions that eventually evolved to become their own congregation. However, it should also be pointed out that this was the department that was also in charge of running and administering the residential school system for the United Church. These records fall primarily under the General Council archives. And I'll touch on them very briefly, but I do just want to acknowledge that, as I've mentioned, I run the program for the Ontario Regional Council archives. And so I don't want to tell tales out of school on the General Council archives. They are their own team with their own rules, and they deal more closely with residential school records than we do in the Regional Council archives. And the General Council archives is also responsible for the records of the Methodist Church pre-union at the higher levels. So I mentioned that pastoral charges, Methodist records are going to be kept at the congregational level. But when it comes to the conferences or presbyteries, the Methodists called them districts, those records are going to be housed in the General Council archives. We've been around for a while. The United Church Archives was informally created sometime in the 30s, and then more systemically brought into play as a character in the 1950s. And then we became a truly professional organization in the 70s and 80s with a professional team of archivists being hired on. So we've got a lot of stuff, and we've got a lot of really good stuff. We have hundreds of meters of textual records from everything, including minute books, property and legal records, so original deeds, mortgages, land transfers, materials relating to cemeteries. We have the vital statistics registers and the membership records, which are going to be incredibly useful tools and are incredibly useful tools for genealogists. And we do have some adoption records, and I'll get to those a little bit later. They're a little bit trickier to access, but those do fall under the Ontario Regional Councils, so I will happily talk about them later. We have tens of thousands of photographs in our vault. These range from United Church Women social events, strawberry socials. They may include photo albums that missionaries brought back from their tours in Japan and China. Social gatherings. I can't tell you how many pictures of celebratory cakes we have for 25th, 50th, 75th anniversaries. We hold the architectural records for many congregations in the United Church, and plenty of other material as well. We do have a small library that falls under General Council that is primarily focused on publications that the church has put out. But we do have something of a library about, theology more broadly. Now, when it comes time to actually do genealogical research, the treasure trove is really to be found in vital statistics registers. And these are the most important things that we receive. We love all records. We love most records, but like many parents, we secretly have a favorite child, and for us, those are vital statistics registers. These are your baptismal registers, your marriage registers, and your burial registers. I would say 97% of the time in the United Church context, these registers are found at the pastoral charge or the congregation level. Sometimes we do see where theology students or home missionaries are being sent around. They're not tied to a particular congregation, and they're performing baptisms, marriages, and burials. And so often these will fall under missionary records, but these aren't very common. In most cases, somebody is baptized at Brooklyn United Church. There are registers from Brooklyn United Church, and we can pull those. And these will often contain some of the most crucial basic information about an individual, including the date of their birth and where they were born, the names of their parents, in some cases, it'll list their current address, religious denomination, and much more. And I'll break it down individually for each one. And I do actually just want to take the opportunity here to ask how my sound is doing.
It has straightened out. I'll give you a shout if it happens again, and then maybe we'll ask you to turn off your video.
Okay.
And that might help it, but at the moment you're okay.
Okay. Thank you. So just a brief touching on the vital statistics registers. I should say that we do adhere to various privacy legislation because, as you can imagine, these can be very sensitive personal information. And so as such, the typical blanket rule that we apply is that for 100 years after a baptismal record is created, it is restricted. It may be restricted to that specific individual or their power of attorney or somebody who has been given permission from the individual to access it. We also restrict marriage records for 75 years and burial records for 25 years after creation. Unlike many other denominations, the photographing of registers is strictly prohibited by the church mandate. This is not an archives level policy. It actually was made by the General Counsel Executive, so the executive body in the national office. And these were formed out of decisions in the 1990s when we were being approached by the Church of Jesus Christ and Latter-day Saints to microfilm all of our registers. Of course, this went on later to aid in the creation of Ancestry. And so, a word of caution is that you really shouldn't be seeing any United Church registers on Ancestry.ca. If you do, please let me know because I need to have a word with the congregations. But that being said, there are, of course, exceptions to the rule. If somebody is doing academic research and they agree to dispose of any photographs once they're done, special considerations can be made. But more importantly, transcriptions are still permitted. And they actually have been done by the OGS in the past, particularly the Toronto and Halton branches have come in, spent weeks in the archives, looking at open registers, transcribing them, and then making them available for sale. And we are happy if the Durham branch of the OGS would be interested in doing that. Just shoot me an email after. There we go. So I'll start with baptismal registers, and I'll move sequentially: birth, marriage, death. So baptismal registers, as the name implies, is a listing of every baptism that's taken place at a particular pastoral charge. And they provide information. This includes both on the newborn and the family. I will say that for all registers, the format has changed over the last century, but generally this is the information that they capture. They will get the given and surname for the infant as well as their parent, the date and the place of birth, and the date and the place of baptism, as well as the biological sex of the child. We're seeing this terminology change a little bit. But this is the historical term. And they're restricted, as I mentioned, for 100 years. And this you can see on the right, the cover for, I swear, like 75% of all church baptismal registers have this cover. And this is from Mount Zion Pastoral Charge out in Simcoe. Marriage registers are actually personally my preference because they provide a lot of information that you don't find in the baptisms or the burial registers. They don't often provide specific birthdays, but they do include the age of both the bride and the groom, or after the mid 2000s, groom, bride, and bride, as well as their birthplaces. They'll list their marital status, which is kind of funny when you're thinking that they're, about to be married. Currently, it will say, single, divorced, or widowed. Historically, the terms bachelor and spinster were applied to, men and women, respectively. And of course, bachelor is a pleasant enough term. Spinster, not so much. So I'm sure everyone is happier to see these ones gone. Often the occupation of the happy couple would be listed as well. Sometimes it'll list the actual street address at which they live. Sometimes it's more just the town. It will list the religious grounds as well as their parents' names and their parents' places of birth. And as I mentioned, these are restricted for 75 years. Burial registers, these are often actually the smallest register that comes into the archives. You'll see that the cover is actually pretty much the same as the other two registers. So maybe it's across all registers, they seem to have the same setup. This one can be a little bit trickier in terms of accuracy when it comes to the information, because you don't have, for the obvious reason of being dead, you don't have the actual individual providing you with the information. However, it will provide the name, typically the city or town in which they live, their sex or gender, the age at which they died, date of death. Sometimes it will list the cause of death. It really depends on how much a given minister, how much research they're willing to do, and how closely involved they are. But perhaps of greatest interest would be that it actually lists where they're buried. Sometimes this is also just going to be listed at the town level, but it's not uncommon for a very particular cemetery to be listed. And these are restricted, again, as I mentioned, for 25 years. Shifting away from vital statistics, one of the tools that researchers can use are historic rolls. These are just, the membership listings for individual congregations. And sometimes they will list adherents, and an adherent is somebody who attends the church, may volunteer, may contribute money, but hasn't actually gone through the process of becoming a member, whether that means they haven't, had an adult affirmation of faith, or an adult baptism, or they haven't transferred from another congregation formally. And historic rolls, I will say, are their own beast. It is not uncommon for the United Church archivists across the country to be sending emails back and forth to one another about, what does this term mean? In fact, we've received one from the Ottawa archives this morning. Different information is taken, different information practices are being used across congregations, and even in, a single congregation over multiple years. Typically, the idea is when your historic roll is filled up because you have, a full roster of members, what you would do is you would create a new historic roll, remove any individuals that are no longer members and listing why, such as death or transfer, and then you would send the old historic roll off to the archives. I don't think that this is something that's taught in theology school. And so, as I mentioned, practices vary widely. I did also mention that the Ontario Regional Council, shortened to ORCA because it's just a fun acronym, does hold some adoption records. And this is based from the Victor Home for Unwed Mothers. It was as the name implies, a home for unwed mothers based out of Toronto, actually just up the street from where I currently am. It began operation in the early 1900s and still exists. It's under new management. It has a separate operating structure and it's very much arm's length from the United Church, but it is still in operation. Not all children who were born to women who went to that home were adopted out. Unfortunately, there was a period of time where women may not have had final say on whether or not their children were to be adopted out. We have, I want to say, several hundred boxes of case files and administrative records. Case files being organized by year and by the name of the mother. And for, I think, obvious reasons, these are heavily restricted in accordance with provincial legislation. We do get requests about these often from people who either were women in the home or who were the children that were adopted out. However, we do provide access to these records, but we have to do so in a way that is compliant with the standards in which Service Ontario adheres to. There are actually many articles in the news, not only in Broadview, the United Church publication, but in national newspapers about these forced adoptions, not just in the United Church, but across multiple denominations. Cemetery records. On a cheerier note, these ones can be a little bit tricky to identify in the United Church archives, and that's because in the 20th century, the government of Ontario took steps to have government ownership over cemeteries. This very rarely does it mean that the government of Ontario itself is administering these. Usually this would be delegated to a local municipality. And so those records are usually found in the records of municipal archives. And I hope the archivist at Bruce County agrees with me. Otherwise, I might get a very mean email leader. I'm kidding. She's lovely. I know when I worked at the County of Wellington archives, those cemeteries that were administered by the municipalities often sent the interment registers to the archives. And so this wouldn't necessarily be something that you would find in the United Church. But it is something that we can direct you to. And then that isn't to say that the United Church is completely divorced from cemeteries. At the congregational level, you'll often see that individual congregations are still very much involved in providing upkeep on ensuring that the tombstones are clean and legible, providing any maintenance that may be needed. These will often be tied to a cemetery in which they have a historical connection. So if it was a United Church cemetery at one time, they'll still maintain that tie. But this varies depending on the capacity of the congregation. And you do often see, I mentioned earlier that the presbytery is where a lot of the power in the United Church rested. This was also the body primarily responsible for real property management. So if a congregation wanted to sell the church property, they would have to get the presbytery to sign off on it. And so presbyteries would have, name varies across presbyteries, but they would have a property committee or a committee on property and cemeteries, or a committee on real property. You get the gist of it. Sometimes they will have transcriptions of cemetery tombstones, much like the OGS or Ontario Ancestors are currently doing. They may also have information on plans to rearrange the cemetery depending on, whether there's, sometimes they would try to maximize efficiency, and instead of having graves scattered around, they would try to line up every tombstone after the fact. And so you can see plans and correspondence relating to all of that in congregational levels. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention residential and day school records, which, depending on your background, may be of genealogical use to you. The United Church of Canada holds these records and this is straight off the website, that document the colonizing practices of the church and its antecedent bodies. These include residential and day schools. In the Ontario context, only one residential school was ever run by the United Church, and this being in Mount Elgin. But the United Church did run multiple day schools across the province and many more across the country. United Church residential schools were primarily located in BC and the Prairie provinces. And I mentioned before that these records fall under the General Council Archive program. And so I'm not going to go too much into them because I want to make sure that the information you get is completely accurate. But please note that we do take our responsibilities under the Truth and Reconciliation Commission very seriously. And please consider visiting our page, The Children Remembered, and looking at the major initiative, Bringing the Children Home, to learn more. So I've told you a lot about the records that genealogists may be interested at the United Church Archives, but I actually haven't talked about how you actually find them. And what good is knowing that things exist if you don't know where to get them? So I mentioned earlier that our collections are largely organized around their creating body. And so this means that community of faith records or congregation records are going to be arranged around either the pastoral charge or an individual church. I make the distinction that pastoral charges are rural and individual churches are urban. This isn't true 100% of the time. The United Church around the corner from me, Eastminster United, is part of a regional ministry. I am in downtown Toronto, and this is a cost-saving measure. But it is very common that in the rural settings to have a minister split across several different denominations, or several different congregations. And so we arrange our records at that level. We have hundreds and hundreds of finding aids that have for records that have been arranged and described to help researchers find what they're looking for. And I mentioned earlier that the antecedent bodies at the congregation level are arranged alongside the United Church counterparts. The image on the right is a screenshot of the United Church of Canada Archives catalog landing page. The discerning archival researcher may be familiar with this layout. It is the access to memory database that many churches are slowly switching to. Another popular one would be Past Perfect. I'm going to give you a walkthrough of how to get here, how to use it, and hopefully this will help you find the records that you're going to be looking for 95% of the time. All right, and now it's time to shift to the demonstration. For you Star Wars fans out there, quick note, you may remember Obi-Wan looking for records pertaining to a particular planet, and the archivist saying if an item doesn't appear in our records, it does not exist. Full disclosure, if you ever meet an archivist who claims that their archives is complete, run. That is a very bad archivist, because no archivist will ever claim that they know exactly where every record has ever been. So I'm going to stop the share very quickly, very briefly, so I can switch to my internet browser, so I can give you a walkthrough of the United Church of Canada catalog. Are people seeing my homepage? Or sorry, my Chrome browser?
Yes.
Smashing. All right, so if you were to Google the United Church of Canada archives, this is going to be the page that comes up. This United Church of Canada archives is the one that's based in Toronto, that houses records for Ontario as well as the national body. And we actually share our catalog with the British Columbia United Church archive as well. So this is the general landing page, where it has information about our location, our hours, the different types of records that we bring in, projects that we're working on, our reconciliation framework for dealing with records of by and about Indigenous communities can be located here. We do have resources available for individual communities of faith, as well as higher levels to help them decide on how to handle their records. And we list our privacy policies here as well. If you're coming here as a genealogist hoping to get access to records, the archives catalog is where you need. Now, this is the landing page that you saw a few moments ago. This is access to memory, and I know that my contact at Brooklyn United Church was in the audience earlier. So I'm going to use Brooklyn United Church as an example, in a good way. So let's say you know that your grandfather was born in Brooklyn, on the north end of Oshawa. He was baptized there, and you're looking for a copy, trying to find out, what his date of birth was, when he was baptized, or maybe you're looking for your parents' marriage certificate. Those would be located in those vital statistics registers. And those can be found, as I mentioned, at the congregational level. So you can, in the search bar, you can go Brooklyn, and you'll see Brooklyn United Church Fond. Fond or fonds is it comes from French, and it's just, think of it similar to a collection. So that is the collection that we have on Brooklyn United Church that's from Brooklyn United Church. And it'll say Ontario. In some cases, we'll see Trinity United Church, of which there are, of course, dozens. And so we'll say Trinity United Church, or in brackets, Peterborough, Ontario, to make that distinction. And when you click into Brooklyn United Church, you get a high-level description we have in the archives. So you can see that we have were made between the years of 1870. Oh, I know that maybe have low audio quality, so I'm just going to turn my video off. Maybe. There we go. So you can see that the records that we have from Brooklyn United Church were created between the years of 1872 and 1998. And yes, the United Church was formed in 1925. But as I mentioned, Brooklyn Methodist Church records would still be contained within this description. You can see from here that we have 1.83 meters of textual records. That's a lot. That would be several bookshelves full of records that have been filed vertically in boxes, neatly arranged. This is going to be a lot of information, and you want to make sure that you're going through the finding aid and identifying which records you want to look at when you come in. We often provide a brief history of an individual congregation. You can see the read more, and the scope and content just is a high-level overview of the records. Now, to actually view our finding aids, you have two options. You can click on the finding aid button along the side and hit download, or you can, there will often be a link here under uploaded finding aid. And God willing. Aha, okay. Here is typical United Church finding. Um, I'll give it a second to load. Switch to this one. So this is Brooklyn United Church's finding aid. Something to note is that the way that we have structured our finding aids is that the oldest body is listed first. We try to separate out on this document the difference, if it was created by a Methodist church versus a Presbyterian church or a United church. And so you may, in this case, the first series is the Brooklyn Methodist Circuit, which it spans from 1872 to 1925. But if you scroll down, you'll see Brooklyn United Church, and in brackets it says Brooklyn Methodist Circuit included, because some of the records, like registers, are going to be used both pre and post union. It makes no sense to start a book in a baptismal register in 1924, and then once 1925 comes along, you throw it out or toss it aside, even though you may only have a few entries. Anytime records come into the United Church, they are given a unique identifying number. We call these accession numbers, but that is the number in bold along the side. In this case, we can use 2009.056L. What that is saying is that this was the 56th donation of records in the year 2009. The L is there to signify to us that it is a congregation level record. We use chiefly two different distinctive classifications. We use L for congregation, which is L. I'm assuming it was for local. This was started in the 70s, and we use C for everything else. So general council, regional council, conferences, and presbyteries fall under C. And the number next to this is the box number and the file number. So let's say your grandfather was baptized in 1927. Let's make it easier, 1924, for that 100 years restriction. What you could do is you would come into this finding aid, you would look for Brooklyn United Church. Baptisms, the registers are often, or should always, be listed at the top under any particular series. So you'll see them, the first thing you should see is the baptisms, marriages, and burial records. You can see that we have a baptismal register from 1915 to 1946, and that is under the accession 2009.056L in box 14. The OS just means it's an oversized box, and it's file 2. So once you have that information, you can go to the archives website, book an appointment, and you can say to our wonderful full-time reference coordinator, hi, I would like to come in and view the baptismal register for Brooklyn United Church. Here is the identifying number, here's the location. Often if you say, hey, I want to look at the Brooklyn United Church baptismal register for 1915 to 1946, we can find it pretty quickly because you've done the heavy lifting for us. But if you want to earn brownie points with the archivists, if you can give us those identifying numbers, you will be our favorites. Also bring us back. So we do not, as a general rule, post scans of records on our catalog. Most for a couple of reasons. One being that it takes up a lot of our capacity of our website, and we would have to start paying more money to do that. To be honest with you, the other is that if people see, 5 digital records in a description, they may be inclined to think that those 5 records are the only thing that the archives has, when really we have thousands of documents for that particular congregation. We just don't have them digitized. That being said, we do item level description for unique media. So we aim to do individual photograph descriptions, which you can see here under the hierarchy. There's the font, and we have Brooklyn United Church has 1 photograph. Some collections have thousands, and we try to provide a title, identify any individuals that may be in them, date them, provide a location and the context for why these photos exist. The same is true for architectural records, as well as audiovisual material, including VHS tapes, DVDs, CDs, you name it, it's in there. So and I will again stop the share. And I'm looking at the time, and I've only got a couple of minutes, and that's okay because I'm nearing completion. And I'm sure, is it saying, there we go. Next slide. There we go. To request an appointment, after reviewing the finding aids, we do beg you to book an appointment. It helps us to know who's coming in and when. It means that we can pull the records for you in advance. And depending on the records that you're interested in seeing, they may be in offsite storage. We are running very low on storage space, and so a lot of the audiovisual materials are actually in an offsite storage facility at the New Brunswick United Church Archives, because they have a large repository. When you're emailing, and you can do this through the Get in Touch page, as I mentioned, let us know what materials you're accessing, when you'd like to visit, for how long. And whether you have any accessibility needs. And this isn't something that is often asked, and it's not something I typically would want to ask, but our space is currently not well set up. And so giving us that heads up means that we can try to make some configurations in advance to make your visit as pleasant as possible. I do have some very exciting news when we're looking at the future of the United Church of Canada archives, and that is that in 2026, we'll actually be moving. We are currently in the midst of building a brand new purpose-built facility tailored to the archives. We'll be moving to 300 Bloor Street West in Toronto, which is Bloor Street United Church. It was the home church of the very first moderator of the United Church of Canada, George C. Pigeon. The picture that you see in the bottom right, you can see a little red brick house along the right-hand side. That is Pigeon House. That is the manse, or the house in which George Pigeon lived while he was the minister to Bloor Street United. And the archives is actually going to be based out of Pigeon House. You can see again, in that one photograph along the side, the gray brick facade that juts out with the windows. That's actually the space that the archives is going to be in. And excitingly, not just for us, but for genealogical researchers as well, this isn't a sole venture. We are moving in and sharing space with the Presbyterian Church of Canada archives, as well as the General Synod archives for the Anglican Church of Canada. So it is going to be as close to a one-stop shop as we could possibly offer without bringing in the Roman Catholic Church archives as well. Tentatively, this is booked for August of 2026, and I am really crossing my fingers. But we hope to see you in our beautiful new space. This is the end of the formal presentation part, and so I open the floor to questions. I did see one question in the chat about whether or not there would be a handout.
Yes,
I'll answer that one.
that was the
I'll
most
answer that
question.
I'll answer that one up front, and I'll say not yet. In preparation for this presentation, I looked to see what handouts we normally provide to researchers, genealogical researchers, and they're about 10 years out of date. They actually have an old address. They link to staff who no longer work there. The hours are different. The resources have changed a bit. That being said, I have said that we would update this and provide it to the OGS to they can distribute out and post on their website.
Well, Kyle, that was so well organized and flowed so well. I feel like I've learned a lot. And you have got probably about 40 questions in the chat that I receive.
Oh, good.
So I hope you've got your seatbelt on.
I am ready.
Okay. So, so Wanda asked, she's got a copy of two different baptism certificates, one for Copper Cliff in 1921, one for Cache Bay, 1928-29, both towns in Northern Ontario, both children born out of wedlock. She's been to the archives to look for these baptisms and only was allowed to look at those particular years with no records found. Any suggestions as to why that might have happened?
Yeah, and I can't speak definitively because I obviously wasn't there. A couple of reasons that spring to mind. First is congregations in Northern Ontario are among the most challenging for us to get records from. And that's not to cast aspersions on the individuals in Northern Ontario. It's just a matter of geography. Historically, it's been a challenge because the cost of shipping it of records is very high, and that's the responsibility of the congregation. It's in part because a very fair concern that if we send our records to the archives in Toronto, which is at best a 2-day drive, or at best a 1-day drive if you're really excited, when will we ever get these, or how can we ever get access to these? And they often just don't think about sending something down to Toronto. I'm actually from Peterborough area, and I know that what the rest of the province thinks of Toronto. I get it. And so we often don't get very much from Northern Ontario congregations. When it comes to only being able to access the records for a given year, I don't know when you visited. It was baptismal register records 1921 and 1928. If you visited recently in the past year, the 1921 records would be open. The 1928 ones wouldn't be, and so they may have restricted your view of the 1928 records to protect confidentiality. In some cases, it can be tricky because some registers, like ones if it spans, let's say 1920 to 1930, theoretically half the register is accessible and half of it isn't. So that complicates things as well. But those are just some of the reasons why that might be the case. As I mentioned, the archives are never complete.
Yes. Wesley is asking, I was told my loyalist ancestors who settled Ernestown Township were among those who established the first Methodist church in what is now Ontario. What records would the archive have that would either confirm or refute this? And what records of the congregation in the 1790s and first decades of the 1800s might survive?
I will say, and I don't know, given this particular congregation, I've only been here 7 months, so I don't quite have everything memorized. The chances of something from 1790 still being around aren't great, but not impossible. With respect to determining whether your ancestors were founding members of a particular congregation, we may have some minutes. We may have, often, if a church is that old, it will likely have a history that's been done by church members. We'll see these particularly with the older congregations. They're quite proud, and for good reason. And so they may have their own historical societies dedicated to gathering records and writing about them. One thing that you may be able to look at would be the Christian Guardian. It was a newspaper. It was an interfaith newspaper. It's actually available through our catalog. It's keyword searchable. That may be somewhere that you may be able to find information. One thing I actually didn't mention about particular congregations is that in many cases we do have files. We call them kind of like a miscellaneous file, or vertical files if you're so inclined. And it may just be odds and ends, bits and bobs that have come in over the years, newspaper clippings, newspaper or articles, brief histories, programs, and these might outline some church history. We do also have some biographical files for notable ministers or church elders. Probably a little hit or miss on whether they'd be identified there. But it's something, it would be a starting point.
Okay, the next question I had was about residential schools, and you said there was only one in Ontario?
Only one United Church run residential school in Ontario, and that was Mount Elgin. There were day schools as well.
Yeah. She did find some in Portage La Prairie, for Portage La Prairie at the United Church Archives, University of Winnipeg. So she was hoping there was more in Toronto, but I guess not.
There would be materials in Toronto because there should be ideally materials in Toronto because a lot of the residential schools they would send in reports to the national office, and they had a department that would oversee to some degree the administration of residential schools. And so there may be information there. I want to stress that this is not my archival program, so I don't want to put words into my colleagues' mouths. But I would encourage you to contact us, and the General Counsel Archivist knows the ins and outs.
Okay. Randall says, you don't mention the EUB church, which joined the Union in
1960s. Yeah, you're quite correct. I have a flow chart on my in front of my desk that outlines all of this. However, I have The reason why I didn't mention it or didn't think to mention it is because in my day-to-day work, actually haven't seen too much material from the EUB that comes into that would be useful for genealogists. I haven't seen any EUB material in congregation records. But you're right. Yes, the EUB did join in I believe it was the 60s.
Yeah, Randall says 1968. Would those records be somewhere else?
Quite possibly. They would, I mean, there would be records in the United Church archives. There may not be very many. They might be buried deeper in finding aids. They may largely be in the general council side of things. But prior to the 1970s, the archives wasn't set up as like a professional shop. And so in 1968, people may not have been thinking to transfer records to the archives.
Mm-hmm. Susan, this is interesting. Susan says she was a nurse under the Board of Home Missions at a United Church Mission Hospital in Manitoba. What kind of records could she expect to find for the hospitals?
Those, again, these would fall under general counsel, so it's a bit tricky for me. At the very least, you would likely have administrative reports coming up, annual reports. You may have, I find it unlikely, but possible that there would be HR records, general, if it was run by the United Church, there was probably an oversight body, so their records would be there. Sometimes we get lucky and we may have case files like we do with the adoption records. But without looking at the finding aid, I can't say for certain, but I definitely encourage you to reach out to us.
Okay. Julia says, I have some quarterly tickets from the 1860s, 70s, Wesleyan and Howe Island, Kingston area. What is their significance in history?
Sorry, quarterly tickets?
Quarterly tickets. She said a United minister once told her they were special.
I'd be lying if I said if I didn't admit I'm not actually quite sure.
That might be something where you'd have a book on the Methodists that might say something.
I have at least 5 books on the Methodists in my office. I would actually encourage you to reach out to me specifically because I am intrigued by this. My contact information can be found on the website. And I will say, this is the best part about doing presentations and being an archivist, is you get to learn so much.
Okay, KH asks, do you hold records from the Church of Scotland in your archives, or are they held in the Presbyterian archives? I would think it would matter if they went into union or not, right?
Yeah, so this is a little tricky, and I'll be honest with you. We actually still find records. The archivist for the Presbyterian Church, Kim Arnold, she and I exchange emails quite frequently, in part because we're moving into a shared facility, but also because we often find records for one church in one archive that should be at the other archive. And so if you're looking at the individual congregation level and it is a Presbyterian church that joined Union, these would be housed at the United Church archives. But if it's a church that stayed as part of the Presbyterian Church, it is likely captured in the Presbyterian Church archives. The national body or the national office, that would definitely be found at the Presbyterian Church.
Okay. And I've got a question. Do you have information on circuit riders in Prince Edward County area for
I
1850 to 1890?
I actually do. Um, if you want to, again, reach out to me, because I can't recall it offhand. I was actually not too long ago um, working on some descriptions for uh, a Methodist circuit in Prince Edward County. And there we do have some indices on individual ministers, um, as well as some scholarly work that's been done. Sorry, my cat was attacking the door trying to get in.
Okay. Um, I'm going to skip that one because you already mentioned there were some earlier 1800s records. You're just going to have to look at the catalog. Same with looking for someone born in 1820. How far do the baptismal records go? Again, look at the catalog.
I
Denis Forte is saying, are mothers' names recorded as married or maiden names?
Mother's name. Oh, that's a good question. Uh, Often in what I have seen, they're usually listed as uh, often they're given the maiden name, but this is not something that's standardized across, um, because I have definitely seen it where it's just, John and Jane Doe. Um, but often it would be if I'm remembering correctly, it would be the maiden name. I'm just seeing a message, the latest one that popped up for me about transcriptions of a vital statistics record. Um, And that is actually a service we provide. There is a link to it on our main website about a certified copy. There is a cost of $30, and that's just a cost recovery because it requires a staff member to go in, find it, pull it, transcribe it, sign it, mail it off. Um, but assuming it's your record or it's a record about you, um, we can um, we can definitely do that for you.
Yeah. Lisa's asking marriage registers, would there be any mention of a previous marriage, i.e. a widow's first husband?
The only at the level of, that they were divorced or they were widowed. Um, I haven't seen any instance where it would say, she is the widow of so and so.
Yeah. Okay, I am going to skip any specific requests and they can send a question to you. Now, I do have a question though. Wanda wants to know if she's asking for her own baptism. Can she get her own record and can it be a copy of the original rather than a transcription?
If it is your
Oops.
own record, you most certainly can get a copy of the record of the baptism. Um, it would be a challenge to get a scan, and that's only because when we think about baptismal certificates, we often think about the big cursive ticket that's provided that has um, just your information. When really baptismals, your name is just on one line that sort of stretches across. And so in order to provide you with a scan of it, we have to redact a whole bunch of the document because there may be 20 baptisms on a single page. Um, it would be something that if we were to reach out to the executive minister in charge of the region that church belongs to, it's possible, but definitely would be a challenge.
Okay. Alan's asking, did the Victor Home for Unwed Mothers work with the Children's Aid Society?
It did. It did, and it worked with other children's, like it worked with, and I can't remember exactly what the term is, like the Catholic Children's Aid Society as well. And so we often do, we will often have some sort of cross-pollination where I've had to reach out to social workers from the Catholic Children's Aid Society as well, to uh, try to locate some records.
Okay. Is there a privacy restriction for access to the membership rolls?
I actually don't think so.
Okay.
I looked and didn't see anything.
Okay. I have several Methodist and United Church ministers in my family history. Are all their records in your archive?
Almost, I can say with relative confidence, probably not. They are probably going to be documented in various places. They may have a biographical file. We can find them in the yearbook, in our annual yearbook. It's a bit more of a challenge. Most ministers don't think to send their records to us. We have a policy of not typically keeping sermons, but we do probably have records of that document them, but may not have been created by them.
Okay. Where would small prairie, rural Saskatchewan, and Manitoba churches who have been closed be kept?
So there is an archive in both, I think it's Regina, and there's one in Winnipeg. So depending on which province or part of, it would be in one of those. The Saskatchewan Archives is actually currently without an archivist. So the archivist in Alberta and the archivist in Manitoba are doing double duty and doing what assistance they can for Saskatchewan. But I would reach out to the archivist in Manitoba. Her name is Erin Ackland, and she has the coolest job title I've ever seen, and that is Keeper of the Records, or Keeper of the Archives.
Yeah,
And so she would be the point of contact.
perfect. Starting with unification in 1925, have the former Presbyterian church congregations been required to send in their BM burials, baptisms and marriages and burials? She's been unsuccessful about a Renfrew County church founded in 1849.
Sorry, so you're asking if the churches that were Presbyterian were forced to send their records?
Yeah.
The way I would answer that is that no church is technically forced to send their records, as much as I wish I could, because it would make my life just so much easier in many respects. I mean, at the time of union, there would have been no United Church archives, and one wouldn't, like, it very informally started in the 1930s. But they would definitely have been encouraged, and they continue. Some Presbyterian churches that turned into United Churches have never sent records in, and so they are all sitting in church offices, and we send the occasional email begging them to send stuff into us. But yeah, unfortunately, I can't burst into an individual congregation and demand the records wearing a vest that says archives, but it would feel really cool if I did.
Susan's asking, any other search tips if you know the town, county, but not the exact church or pastor name?
Yeah, what I would say is, and this was actually a question that I saw scrolling through the chat, and that is, where was it? Okay, it was buried a little bit. We do have a resource called, we call it the United Church of Canada Yearbook. And in it, it lists every single pastoral charge along with what, or presbytery or regional council they're part of. And these are organized geographically. So what I would do is go through and look at what United churches were in, let's say Belleville, for example, at a given year, and then just it will often have an address, and then you can try to pinpoint roughly where they are, and you might know that, hey, my grandparents lived in the West End. Okay, here are some congregations that were in the West End. Let's see what they've got.
Yeah. I got several about not being able to attend in person, but you dealt with that. Can you request an archival search for a marriage, for example?
If you provide us with, if you know, for example, that your parents were married in I'm going to use Brooklyn United Church, and you can give us like a few year window. We can do that search for you. It gets challenged. Like if you say my grandparents were married in Toronto in the 50s, there are dozens of churches in Toronto Islington United Church alone has like 8 registers per decade. It would be very challenging and time consuming for us. But if you know, hey, my parents were married in 1948 at Islington United Church, we can do that search for you to see if it's there.
Perfect. We've already dealt with the ministers. When you have a register that's partially restricted, does that mean that a person is unable to view the unrestricted portion, or is the entire register not able to be viewed?
That's something that we're actually discussing right now as we look to update our register policy. Typically, it's pretty easy to accommodate. Where our first goal is to make sure that people get access to the information they need. And so we can put a flag somewhere where you can't look after this. We have a reading room coordinator who sits there, and part of her responsibility is watching folks while they use the archives. Our official policy says that they're closed until the final record is open, but we're typically not that stringent.
Okay. Got a lot of thank yous coming up. There is one gal, Barbara, who has a colored marriage certificate of her grandparents. Would that be something the archive would want, or is it better to give it to the local Hastings County Archive?
I would suggest the Hastings County Archive, only because it's probably something we already have documented in the registers from that particular United or Methodist church, depending on when the marriage was. And we try to minimize the duplication of information just because we have a finite amount of space.
Yeah.
But thank you.
One last question. What are the archive's plans to digitize and index congregation records? Or do we have any?
I was waiting for that. And the answer to that is we currently don't really have many plans. And the reason is it is extremely expensive to digitize records, and it is expensive to maintain them over time. And we just don't have the money to do that.
And that's understandable. So many people, again, more people coming in. Great presentation. Thank you. And I would like to add my personal thanks. And I'm so glad that you included the what you call the 100-year closure, your closure rules certainly makes
Oh,
things
yes, the
easier.
restrictions.
Yes. And thank you for doing the live demo. That was wonderful.
Oh, my pleasure.
Now, if anybody missed it, it was unitedchurcharchives.ca. It's the website.
And my contact information is there. I have company that I have been neglecting, so I have to hop off
Yes,
if that is all right. But please
that's
feel free
great.
to email me.
Thank you so much for a lengthy question and answer period. This is wonderful.
My pleasure. All right, take care.
Take care. Bye now. Okay, so let me just bring up my presentation again. And somebody did say something about when I did mine, you saw my presenter view, and they updated my app, and I can't find my partial. Well, maybe there's. Let me go here. Portion of screen. There it is. Let's see if that worked. Is that working? Yes. Thank you very much. So, again, Kyle is going to update the handout that they give out for the genealogy societies. He's given us permission to put the recording on our open public YouTube channel. So when we get that updated handout, we will put it on our homepage on our website right beside the link to the YouTube channel. So hopefully he'll manage to update it pretty soon. So some of the announcements. If you are a new member to OGS, that is, you haven't been a member for the last 2 years, if you join in November, your name will be entered into a draw, and that person will receive the membership for free. And there are many benefits to being a member. This is a page on the ogs.on.ca website that you can click and find out a lot more details. The Society's monthly webinar is going to be on military records with Richard Ruggles. It's this Thursday at 7 p.m. Free to Ontario Ancestor members, $10 for non-members. Go to the homepage of ogs.on.ca and you'll be able to register from there. Just a reminder that Giving Tuesday is December 3rd, and you are encouraged to give to nonprofit organizations, of which we are one. Local news, the Uxbridge Genealogy Group meeting is November the 21st, either at the library or on Zoom. Now, the Zoom link is only sent to paid up members. It will be Roger Blinko talking about the soldiers of Uxbridge. But if you wish to attend in person, I believe they'll take a donation, but otherwise I think it's free to go in. And this Roger Blinko has created quite an interesting website with biographies on the soldiers and their families. The Lakeshore Genealogical Society in Coburg, they're going to show a legacy webinar with the English historian Janet Pugh. So if you wish to register for that, there's the email to do so. Our DNA Special Interest Group is Wednesday, November 20th. If you wish to join our group, send me an email at either of these two links. We use Jitsi as our platform, which only uses your internet browser. You don't have to download an app or a program. But it is kind of a private group because we do share and see other people's dashboards. And, we do not want to have a broadcast of other people's information. We had a request on our Facebook page from the Brooklyn Heritage Society, and it's so funny that he used the Brooklyn United Church as his example today. They are looking for accounts of local nurses who served overseas during World War II, and that is their email address if you know of such an account. Our virtual social and research drop-in is November 28th, the fourth Thursday of each month at 11 a.m. And on the OGS events calendar and on our homepage, there is a Zoom registration link if you haven't already registered since September. And that's for our 24-25 year, September through to June. December 3rd, we're going to do an in-person only meeting. It's going to be our annual show and tell. It's going to be our potluck Christmas treats and library research time. We'll be opening up probably just around 7 o'clock, so you can come ahead of time. And you can bring items to show and tell, or you can come and look at the library that we have, that sort of thing. Now, when you come, remember to bring both your research questions and a few treats. The drinks will be supplied. Now, the lift at the church is really unreliable anymore, so we will put out some chairs on the landings up to our library. It's only 1.5 floors up from the side door on Rosslyn Road. So hopefully it won't cause too many people to be short of breath. The Northminster United Church is at 676 Simcoe Street North. We'll likely be sharing the building with the Scouts and Cubs. So it might be a little bit of noise, but hopefully not too bad. There is parking in the church parking lot, which is off Rossland and Carnegie Street. There's parking along Carnegie Street, and there's school parking lot diagonally across Simcoe and Rossland Streets that you can also park there and walk over and cross at the lights. So our January meeting is Gordon McBain from Manitoba. He's got a topic called Where Have All the Obits Gone? And so that will be a very interesting meeting, I am sure. We are open Tuesdays and Thursday mornings in our library and office at Northminster United Church. By appointment, you must make sure that we're going to be there and that we can come down and open the door for you. So that's the email address to arrange for a visit to our archives and library. This is our contact information, and I can put this over in the chat if people want, or you can take a screenshot. So at this point, I'm going to stop my sharing, and we can have a 15 or 20-minute open chat if people wish. We're losing members as we watch the participant window, but anybody who's left, if you've got a question you want to ask, or a topic you want to raise, or a topic for a future meeting that you want to tell me about, feel free to open your mics, and if you wish, turn on your video and ask away.
Nancy,
Yes.
I'd just like to mention that we do have transcriptions especially, of some of the United Church records in our office. So if anybody is looking for Brooklyn or anywhere else in Durham region, we do have transcriptions of quite a few of the records from the church. Our members, Bessie Gannon and Kay Pickard, went to Toronto many times, years and years ago, and did a lot of transcribing of the records. So we do have them available in our collection.
Yeah.
Of course, the Halton Peel branch and Toronto branch also put out their Places of Worship Vital Statistics books, and Durham region was one of the ones published. It contains baptisms 1832 to 1899, marriages 1835 to 1899, and burials 1853 to 1881. And that's
How,
another
any,
source.
any idea? Those were Methodist, weren't they?
No, it's called Durham Region United Churches. This is the book, formerly Congregational, Methodist, and Presbyterian. So they do
Okay.
cover here. Maybe, yeah. So it
Yes.
does cover a fair bit of it.
Yeah. Do we have any idea how complete that coverage is?
No, not really.
Okay. Well, contact us if you have a question, and we can go through the indexes and see if they mention the church you're interested in, I guess would be the best thing for me to say.
Right.
Okay. Wanda, oh, okay. I had turned off my chat, but hold on. Let me go back here. Wanda, do you have a list of places of worship and years they exist? Do you have a transcribe of the Ida Cavan Township Anglican Church records? We wouldn't have Cavan Township. That would be under Kawartha branch. They got Kawartha branch got 3 townships from Old Durham County, and we got 3. And Cavan was not one of ours. And so I think the Anglican Church records, we had a talk last year from the Anglican Church archives. And to me, they'd be the people to ask. And they'll answer, the same as Kyle said, they'll answer if you have a church name or a town and a fairly specific date, I'm sure they would send you a transcription from any records they might have, and they'd at least could tell you whether or not they've got those records or whether they're still in the local hands. So that's, and then Joyce would like me to put up my slide again with all the contact information. Okay, hold on a second.
Nancy, I'll just add, at our office, we do have back issues of the Kawartha Branch newsletter, and they did publish marriages, I'm going to say maybe late 1820s onward for Ida Anglican Church. And
Boy, you have a good memory.
well, I've used those records for myself. I have people in them, so
Yeah.
but we do have
Okay.
some of those in our office as well. So that's, if you're looking for a marriage, that would be one way. Kawartha Branch themselves have microfilms of the Ida Church records, presumably in their library collection. I honestly don't know for sure, but it was microfilm.
Okay, that's interesting. And I believe Kawartha Branch is out of the main public library branch.
Yes, it is.
Peterborough. Thank you,
Yes.
Jen. Yes.
Nancy,
Yes.
I transcribed the Pontypool, and I can't think of the name of the community north of it, marriages, some 30 or so years ago, and you should have a copy of that.
Yes, we
Okay,
do.
was that Anglican or United Church?
Well, Methodist.
Methodist, okay.
It ended up about 1916. I don't think there were any, I think 1916, 1918. I think 1918 was about the last year.
Okay. Well, thanks very much. It's Bob, isn't it? Bob Halfyard?
Yeah, it was.
Okay, great.
Something else I wanted to tell, I felt the telling. My father was a minister, and in 1925, he worked very hard to get church union going. And in 1924-25, he was on Little Current on Manitoulin Island. He was at the first service of the United Church, and I have a copy of the order of service.
Oh, interesting.
And I loaned it to our minister because she didn't know much about it, and she looked at it. But in doing so, I found a map. And the map showed all the churches in Northern Ontario. And nearly all the churches in Northern Ontario in 1925 were union churches. And I almost wrote that for Kyle to mention to him. And there were a lot of union churches out west. And that was an omission, actually, in the background of the United Church. And there were very few, only about 5 or 6 places like Sault Ste. Marie and North Bay and places like that had both Presbyterian and Methodist churches. Nearly all the other places had union churches.
Okay. So by union, they shared the minister and
they might have had a Methodist minister. They might have had a Presbyterian minister.
Yeah, but it was a single service.
Yeah,
each Sunday.
Single church.
Yeah, single church, single service, and well, I have to admit, when I first went to the United Church in Ajax, it was a Methodist minister who was the minister when we went there, in that would be like 1977-ish. So, very interesting. Thank you, Bob. Does anybody else have
a question?
Yes.
Actually, Robert Halfyard's comment brings up another question. Where is his book in or what would I look for in our office to find the Pontypool records? I've got family from the Pontypool area.
Or where?
Pontypool?
Yeah.
Well, you heard his guide. Look for Pontypool. The Pontypool changed. Pontypool was the main church in a circuit for a long time. It still was in the late 40s. When my grandmother died, the minister came in 46. The minister came from Pontypool.
Yeah.
And after
you were
that,
saying that you had written something and it was in our.
Yeah, Bob very generously sent us a lot of his transcriptions.
So you have some so we have some transcriptions.
We have a lot of Bob's work.
Okay,
in
so
our library.
Yeah.
Well,
so Bob,
use the finding aid that Carl told you, and see if you look for Pontypool. See if you can find, if that's where you're interested. Look for Pontypool. See what you can find.
Okay.
If not, look for Bethany.
Yep. No, I was meaning in particular the transcriptions you'd provided, because they might be more available than what's through the United Church, depending on the time period.
Yes.
They will be in.
Yeah. I have to pull my copy out. It's in the cupboard, and I'd have to pull it out. I think it was from about 1880 to 1918, the years that were in that.
Yeah, that would be a time period of interest to me.
Yeah. So we need to
But
ask.
where do you live?
I'm not sure off the top of my head, but it was
No, but where do you live now?
Oshawa. I'm in Oshawa.
Well, go to the library and get Steve to look
Yes,
the book
yeah,
the book up.
Yep. So Steve will have to tell us which shelf it's on, but
Yeah, that's what was my question.
Yeah.
But another just tip for everybody, and I'm sure everybody knows the archives. I didn't want to say it, but they're getting so much information right now. They probably have a lot more than what their finding aids say, and it'll probably be a long time before it's up on their finding aid. What they do have. As some of you know, I personally took up a whole, like 30 boxes this summer, and for Simcoe Street United Church, and it does not show yet, which is normal because there's a lot of stuff to go through.
Okay, I was on the archives conference, or Presbyterian Conference Archive Committee here, on a Hamilton Conference, Niagara Presbytery, for about 30 years, and I got to know it pretty well.
Mhm.
And the thing is, for the churches to put their records in the archives was completely voluntary.
Yes.
And a lot of the churches didn't do it.
Yep.
In 2004, our church amalgamated with First United Church in St. Catharines, which had been a Presbyterian church.
Mhm.
They hadn't deposited a single thing. I went to a cupboard downstairs next to the boiler, and they had records back to the founding of the church in 1840.
Yep.
I had to go through all those things.
Yeah.
And
I went
now
through 50.
those
I went through
records are,
roughly 50 boxes.
well, I don't know how many boxes. If you look up St. Catharines and look up First United Church, you see how much was there.
Yeah.
yes.
And I had to, so we took them to the archives,
Mhm.
because that's when a church amalgamates. Then they have to do that.
Yep. Yeah. Our case was a church closure, so we took it up.
Okay, so I've got several people with their hands up. From what I can see in the participant window. And Wanda has actually turned on her video, so I'll take her first.
Okay. What my question was is the parish places of worship. You have a complete index, what churches, when they started, where the records are, and an index to all your transcriptions.
We do have binders about our churches in Durham region. And Janice could probably answer this better than I can as to what's in those binders.
The information is not totally complete, but as much as we can figure, we've got when the church opened, when it closed, if it did close or if it's still active, where the records might be, which is one of the things that's very sparse still. We're still looking for a lot of records. A little bit, a picture of the church, a little bit of history of the church. That's what the binders include.
Okay. Does the binders include if you have a transcription to those records?
I hope so.
And why I asked about Ida, because I remember years ago somebody, and I'm not sure if a co-author or your group has indexed the records. That's why I always wondered about it.
It would have been Kawartha because they were the ones with the microfilm. We tried to get a copy, but we weren't allowed.
Okay. So is it indexed in their newsletters?
Yes, they. I don't know the years off the top of my head, but the marriages were kind of published chronologically. About 2 pages in each newsletter, and it just rolled on from there for many years.
Okay, so I'm going to have to check with Kawasa to see if they digitalize their newsletters to see if I can get a copy.
Yeah, or drop into our office. We have binders of them.
Oh, I'm terrible at this. I'm always downloading or indexing stuff I see rather than just names, because I got so many names in Ontario. It's hard to decide which name to look at.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Next, I'll have.
I should tell you something else.
Okay.
The United Church policy is that the church records must go to the archives if they're being somewhere. It is against policy to put them, say, in a local archive or anything, or a university archive or anything like that. That is against church policy. It should go to the United Church archives.
Yeah. Should be in local hands or at the archives, which is interesting because there's always exceptions to the rule.
I like the idea that all three of them are going to be in the same building.
Yes, that'll be exciting. We got to wait for that though. Okay, so Anne, you've got your hand up. And along.
Yes. Oh, what was I going to say now? Okay, no, I was I was going to mention that as well as archive records, we do have some other we have some books that were from the Christian Guardian.
Oh, yes.
Yes, and so those are kind of related. They have a lot of marriage announcements, birth announcements. They're not official records, but they're still good.
Yeah, transcriptions, I think, but it's a published book and it's a series of those books. And Steve might do better answering.
Well, that'd be the
What was,
Donald Mackenzie books, I think that's his name, and and books like of similar ilk. Yes, we have a lot of the collection to that up to I'll say 1900 anyway.
well, like he said,
Isn't
the
that-
guy, the archivist, it's now online for the whole Christian Guardian. So you can see the actual newspapers.
It could
Yes.
be. That would be great. Yeah.
Yeah, they have it at the archives, the actual newspaper. I'm not sure it's online.
It is.
I didn't.
I've seen it.
You've
Is
seen
it
it?
indexed, though?
That's good. Thank you.
Is it indexed?
I think you can do a search text,
Hmm.
but it's been a while since I've been on it.
Okay.
Because if it wasn't indexed, you could look in these books, these where they
Yeah.
extracted the birth, marriages, and then you could find out what the date was, and then you could go look it up in the scans.
Yes, perfect. Okay, does anybody else have a question that they wish to ask? Or a comment? Or a topic you want me to find a speaker for?
DNA.
We didn't do a DNA one this year. That's terrible. Well, I'll definitely put one in for early spring or late winter. Thank you, Wanda. Okay. So I don't think I have anything else showing up in the chat. So if there's no more questions, I will declare the meeting closed. And thank you, everybody, for coming. It was a great presentation, and I'm so glad that we had a good turnout for Kyle.
Thank you. Well done.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Nancy.